What's up, everybody? Matt Gajewski here, back again with the Stochastic channel, and today we're talking college football DFS ahead of Week 9, the main slate. Before we get started, make sure to hit that thumbs up button, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell so you know when this and all other content goes live. We're brought to you by Prize Picks. They have a first match deposit bonus of up to $100 for new users when they make a deposit. You're also going to get one free month of Odd Shopper. We have tons of tools to help you with your sports betting needs, sides, totals, player props, which parallels right over to Prize Picks, who has college football, NFL, NBA, NHL, all the major sports, as well as a ton of niche sports that you can take advantage of on their platform. Link in the video description below. If you or someone you know has a gambling problem, please call or text 1-800-GAMBLER. Must be 21 or older to play. All right, let's dive right in. We got a big slate. And we'll bring you behind the glass to our data usage tool. This is available over at Stochastic. I'll tell you about that in a little bit, or at least I'll try to remember. We'll see if I do today. Spreads are as of Thursday morning, so if there's been a couple things that updated, that is why. Florida State, Wake Forest kicks off the main slate. 20.5 point total for the Road Seminoles, 51 total. Florida State, 86th in pace. They have about a 51% pass rate. Wake Forest is 19th in seconds per play with a 45% pass rate. We haven't seen a lot of Wake Forest on main slates, so this will be an interesting one to break down. As is usually the case, Jordan Travis is one of my favorite GPP plays. We see Florida State in this position a lot where they're big favorites. They need to be pushed a little bit for Travis to access a ceiling. He's not running as much as he has in previous years. He's been really banged up. Like, he's taken some serious hits and gutted through them. So I don't think we have the longest leash for Travis. You know, if they get up in this game by a lot, he's probably going to get the hook early. He's only averaging 31 attempts per game. But, man, when he is pushed, he has some of the best upside of any signal caller on any given slate. I like him a little more on DraftKings. His price on FanDuel is pretty prohibitive. But on this side, I think he's an excellent GPP play. Florida State's still a 36-point implied team total thereabouts. Wake Forest definitely doesn't scare you. They've had a fairly easy run in the ACC so far, and it's about to get much harder for them. In the backfield, it's a three-way committee, and it ebbs and flows a lot. Trey Benson, their leading rusher, he's averaging just 12.9 touches per game. So it's really hard to get to him at 6,800. Maybe he's a little more appetizing on FanDuel, but I generally don't play the Florida State backs. They're all a little expensive. Maybe you could talk me into a really contrarian Lawrence Tolafili, but still just 7.4 touches per him. And he's typically their pass game back, but it ebbs and flows. It's not just him out there. Rodney Hill siphons off just enough work for me not to really have a ton of interest in this situation. The receiving game I am definitely interested in. Keon Coleman's volume has been down, just 7.1 targets per game this year, but we've seen the upside, the crazy acrobatic catches. He's like Jordan Travis, where in games where Florida State is pushed, the upside is enormous for him. Johnny Wilson's also questionable. I think he plays. All the rhetoric coming out of Florida State's been positive, but you never know. Watch his status. Johnny Wilson, he's really cheap for his role, so he's a player that we should definitely be interested in. Missing a ton of time this year. He's 415 yards, and then Keon Coleman's at 472. So Johnny Wilson, I think, is a straight-up better play if he's fully healthy. We saw Jaheim Bell return from his injury 2 games ago. He now has 15 targets in that span, carries the ball sometimes. Jaheim Bell's a nice value play at 4,200. Beyond this, I don't have a ton. Destin Hill's projected to return. That means we probably see a nasty log jam among the rotational receivers. They use multiple tight ends behind Jaheim Bell. It's pretty nasty once we get beyond Coleman, Wilson, and Bell. For Wake Forest, it looks like we'll get Mitch Griffiths back. I don't think this really matters. All 3 of these QBs stink. Volume is okay, but they're run heavier this year. And I don't think they have a lot of faith in the QB position. Florida State is an excellent secondary. None of these QBs run, so I'm just going to straight up X out Wake Forest, keep this easy. They use a running back by committee, and we just saw Demon Claiborne, Justice Ellison carry 14 and 19 times. When they trail in games, they don't even get close to this. You can't play either of these guys outside of large tournaments. And honestly, I don't think DraftKings makes tournaments large enough to consider these guys. The receiving core is interesting because they do play so fast. I don't know. It's hard for me to get to any of these guys. Jamal Banks averages 8 targets per game. He's probably the main player to consider. But even he does not have the most locked-in, consistent role on this team. Last week, his route rate dropped to 56%. That came directly with Keyshawn Williams benefiting. His route rate went from 22 to 84. Now, this could very well jump right back to Banks. I don't know. All I'm trying to say is there's volatility with these guys. So it's not even like we're guaranteed to get the same three receivers out here every single play. They use weird tight end stuff. Like 2 games ago, Cameron Height, 57% of routes. Last game, 84%. So they don't even use a consistent player personnel look. Like most recently, they were almost all 11 personnel. The game prior to that, they were in a ton of 10, which is 4 wide receivers. So I don't know, man. Wake Forest is hard for me to get to. If anything, it's maybe just a cheap Keyshawn Williams or Wesley Grimes as a run back. I personally think Jamal Banks and Morin are a little expensive, and I think we could find better alternatives. Second game, Oklahoma takes on, oh wait, I should read this before we go. So if you're new to these videos and you like this data tool you're seeing behind the scenes with all these opportunity metrics, it's available at Stochastic. It's in addition to our player projections and our ownership projections. Player projections go down to the individual stat category. So not only useful for DFS, but if you're playing things like Prize Picks, you can just reference those. I like to cross-reference them before I make my cards. But anyway, ton of stuff going on with the college football package. The link is below if you're interested. I basically take care of this by myself. So if you want to support, that's the best way to do so. And those of you that have already supported, thank you. I can't tell you enough how much it means to me. So thanks. Oklahoma, Kansas, 10-point spread, 65 total. Really good game for DFS, highly competitive. Oklahoma 18th in pace, 47% pass rate. Kansas plays slow. They're 112th, only a 40% pass rate, but explosive offense. They've had a ton of big plays. This Oklahoma defense has shown cracks at times. Texas, UCF, both got them on defense a little bit. Still good metrics overall, but we'll start with Oklahoma. Really high team total here. We need to consider Dylan Gabriel. The guy's just, his rushing equity, man. Like I've been starting here the last couple of weeks. It's way better than it's ever been. He has 30 designed attempts over the last 4 games. That's insane. We've never seen Dylan Gabriel run like this. He has 230 cumulative yards. He's giving you a nice rushing floor on top of averaging 304 yards per game through the air. I don't buy Kansas's defense. Since they got into Big 12 play, they've definitely shown cracks. Gabriel's completely fine. He's an outside consideration for cash. It's a tight slate, so I don't know if we can find all the salary to get up there. But, I mean, he's right there every single week now. Backfield again, I mean, they are playing roulette. Tawi Walker was suspended. I don't know why. He's allegedly going to be back here. We'll see. Basically, I just wait for kickoff for the Oklahoma running backs. And if enough of them are out, I play them. If not, like worst case scenario, this is a 4-way committee. So I think we can say Marcus Major and Gavin Sawchuk are probably going to play. Last week, 18 carries for Major, 10 for Sawchuk. Tawi Walker expects to be back off the suspension. That makes it 4. Javonte Barnes allegedly is close to returning off the foot injury. Hasn't played in quite some time. At worst, this is a 4-way committee. At best, it's probably 2 guys, and you're not going to know till warm-ups. This is just a late news situation every single week at this point. No confidence in any Oklahoma running back unless enough of them are ruled out. Receiving game, we definitely can target this. We always want stacking options with Dylan Gabriel. Drake Stoops leads the team in targets. Basically an underneath slot receiver, pretty uninspiring, but PPR points, he makes sense. I'd just rather play Jaleel Farouk straight up. Target share is worse, but you just have way more upside receiving yard-wise. And then we can get beyond that. Nick Anderson is very interesting now that Andrew Anthony's out for the year. He had 9 targets in their last game. Explosive pass catcher. This guy was barely playing to begin the year, and he already has more receiving yards than Drake Stoops. Like, he just might straight up be the best price-adjusted play of the bunch. On FanDuel, he's the most expensive, so I would pivot down to Jaleel Farouk over there. But DraftKings like Anderson a ton. And lastly, the usual Austin Stogner mention. He's playing about 60% of the routes. Dylan Gabriel just doesn't appear to have eyes for him. On the Kansas side, I do think they can do enough and score here. Vegas agrees. They're only 10-point underdogs. Jason Bean is drawing the start. Really athletic quarterback. His stats are a little bit neutered. It's mainly because of the UCF game. He threw the ball like 11 times in that game. They just absolutely clobbered that team. So, I mean, we can play the extrapolation game when games are competitive. When they're down, Bean gets full usage. He's going to be a pretty good play. He's averaging over 5 yards per carry in his career, and it's a long career at this point. He started off with North Texas 6 years ago. And then as a passer, highly efficient. It's not going to be a voluminous offense, but on 24 attempts per game, he's at 228 yards. You think they're down? You think they trail? This volume definitely going to increase, makes being a pretty affordable play on DraftKings. FanDuel is a little expensive. In the run game, we see the backs separate when games are competitive. It's about a 70-30 split in favor of Devin Neal over Daniel Highshaw. When games are competitive, they flat out don't even play McDuffie, Morrison, any of the cheap rotational guys. So Neal's interesting for tournaments. I think he's a bit expensive because it will be a timeshare to some degree, and then he needs to be pushed. So there's plenty of ways he doesn't get there. They're trailing a lot. If they blow out Oklahoma, which is very, very unlikely, he's also not going to play a ton in that situation. So Neal's tricky, good GPP play. And then the receivers, man, like just a rotation. It's really hard to get to. Nobody's playing like more than 80% of the routes. Even Lawrence Arnold saw his routes cut to about 80% last game. He's still my favorite. I slightly prefer him to Luke Grimm just based on the targets. But we saw Skinner's routes cut quite a bit for Trevor Wilson last week. I mean, he played well on the limited routes he had. He only had 2 targets. So Skinner's definitely my least favorite of the big 3. I would rank them Arnold 1, Grimm 2. And honestly, probably Mason Fairchild, their tight end, should be 3 over Skinner at this point. But I don't anticipate playing a lot of Kansas receivers. I think you could just run being naked if you want. He rushes enough for that. Indiana Penn State, blowout galore. 32.5 point spread in favor of Penn State. 46 total. We'll keep this simple with Indiana. Don't play any of them. Now that they have health in the receiver core, they've gotten back Cam Camper. It's become a horrifying rotation. Cam Camper is only getting about 60% of the routes. That hurts everyone. Omar Cooper, Jacuse Carter. I mean, just very easy X out. So I won't spend much time here. I will have 0% Indiana across lineups. Penn State, it's not going to be much higher than 0. Drew Aller's been awful. He only has 56 rushing yards. He's averaging 206 passing yards per game on 32 attempts. And they give him the quick hook in games where they blow teams out. And you see Ben Pribula quite a bit. So not playing a quarterback, not playing a receiver, the volume's just not going to be good enough in a game like this. I anticipate they do have a 32 implied team total. So I mean, you could probably do worse than a one-off like Keandre Lambert-Smith. I just have very little faith in this pass game right now. Nick Singleton, Katron Allen, it's a 50-50 split. No, basically, no matter what, I think you could throw some darts on these plays. They would just be large field one-offs because they're going to smash Indiana here. So it's a tough game overall, but it's Penn State side or pass for me, just sprinkling the players in GPPs. South Carolina A&M, 14.5 point spread, 54 total. This game has a little more interest to me, a lot of it due to pricing, but I think this could get up and down. South Carolina is 34th in pace. They have a 56.5% pass rate. A&M is 77th in pace with a 52.7% pass rate. They've slowed down, and they've gone a little run heavier since Max Johnson took over for Wegman. A couple of mismatches I think could play a role here. This South Carolina D-line should absolutely feast on a horrifyingly bad South Carolina O-line. So Rattler has had pretty good efficiency and mobility this year somehow. Like, I can't even believe this. 114 rush yards per game. He's taken 5 sacks per game. Rattler has been a wizard. I mean, I'm still not going to play him because the bottom could fall out at any time when you're taking 5 sacks per game and now you're facing a good pass rush. Like, he might take 7 sacks. So it's really hard for me to play Rattler. And then, man, I don't know. 7,300, I guess, is a pretty good value. 33.5 attempts per game for 277 yards. The only other problem I have is his receivers are all hurt. Antwain Wells isn't expected back. Amarian Brown's expected to miss this game. Leggett is tentatively expected to play. He's questionable. He barely played last game. He left with an injury. So now you're putting Rattler behind a horrifyingly bad offensive line, good pass rush opposite him with none of his receivers. Man, I don't know. This might be a little narrative-y, but yeah, I don't anticipate playing a lot of Rattler. We just mentioned the receivers. If Leggett plays, his volume is good enough to throw a dart at, I guess. The one thing I'll say is, because of the injuries, we are getting a ton of cheap players. So Omega Blake, 8 targets last game. He's 3,800. Nick Harbor, only 2 targets, but he had a ton of routes. I'm going to pull those up for you right now. Didn't have them up because I skipped over running back, but we'll get back there. Anyway, last game where we saw Leggett leave after 19% of routes. Omega Blake, he's been a full-time player anyway, but just for reference, 75% of routes. Nick Harbor, by far a season high in routes, 81%. So say we get this news that Brown and Wells are out. That's what we're expecting. I think the 3 wide receiver set is going to be Leggett, Omega Blake, and Nick Harbor for what it's worth. Backfield, Mario Anderson. Oh, and Trey Knox is their tight end. He should be mentioned too. He's right in that range. He actually has a good target share. He has 6.5 targets per game over the last 4. So Knox is firmly in play too, but we might be able to mine some South Carolina value plays. Mario Anderson, he's taken over fully as their lead back. Like, they barely played Dak Joyner or Juju McDowell. The problem is we've seen the bottom fall out when they're down 10 carries in their third most recent game. Competitive game second time out, 20 carries, and then another blowout, 12 carries in their last game. He's also been banged up, so tough for me to play Anderson. The only thing I'll say is 4,700 is nice. He's going to project well. So South Carolina is a value play, nothing else. Not trying to play a lot of them. It'll be a mix and match value situation. Max Johnson is going to project pretty well this week. Just for reference, a lot of times we get these greasy 6K to 6.5K signal callers like Luke Altmaier's a popular one, Hudson Card. This week it's probably Max Johnson. They're just implied for nearly 35 points against a bad defense. It is what it is. He's not going to be a guy you feel good about. But the volume's pretty good for Max Johnson. The team still throws a lot. He's somewhat mobile. The turnovers honestly maybe help him a little bit because sometimes Texas A&M gets down in games when they shouldn't. But yeah, Max Johnson, he's a salary saver at quarterback that you can definitely get to, even though it feels bad. And the one thing I'll say for those of you that need your confidence boosted in Max Johnson, Evan Stewart, Aeneas Smith, Noah Thomas, he's got great receivers. So, I mean, you could just fall back on them. All Max Johnson really has to do is deliver the ball to Evan Stewart, Aeneas Smith, and Noah Thomas, and you should feel pretty decent about this. Jake Johnson at tight end. I will be playing some of these receivers with Max Johnson. I would rank them Evan Stewart 1, Aeneas Smith 2, and then Noah Thomas would be a pretty distant third. I'd try to get to the top 2. You can also play Le'Veon Moss as a value play or just an attachment to a Texas A&M team with a good total. They axed Amari Daniels. I haven't heard anything about an injury, but he didn't play a snap last game. So it's now 2 backs. Maybe Daniels carries a little bit, but I know he's had some fumbling problems. Moss, he's now averaging 14.7 touches per game. Hasn't been below that mark in any of the last 4, and his low in that span is 17 touches. You got a pretty decent touch ceiling with Le'Veon Moss at 5.2K. Owens is the change of pace now. Next game up, we've got Houston, Kansas State. Sneaky shootout. Maybe not really that sneaky. The total's 58.5. 17-point spread in favor of Kansas State. I think that's a little rich. I bet Houston, but that's not part of this show. Pace is pretty good. Houston's 40th in pace. Kansas State is 66th. Not super fast by any means, but faster than they've been historically. Houston, they play an air raid style offense, 56.5% pass rate. Kansas State is morphing fast, 44.5% pass rate, but that is dropping rapidly with their signal caller. I don't know. It's a kind of a merry-go-round there. We'll get to it. Donovan Smith, 7,900. Affordable play, good tournament option. 38 attempts per game. He's averaging about 283 yards through the air, so he's live for 300-yard bonuses. On the ground, 184 yards. Pretty decent volume there. He has 40 designed rush attempts. I think Donovan Smith is fine for tournaments. The only thing keeping him down a little bit is that implied team total. Kansas State's defense has given up a lot of production in spots, so I don't really fear them. They lost a couple NFL corners. Backfield's a mess. 3-way committee between Jenkins, Snead, and Mathis. Occasionally Campbell gets involved too. Terrible situation at target. The receivers are all a little expensive. Samuel Brown, Matthew Golden, Joseph Manjack. I actually really like this receiving core. Last week, they all had at least 8 targets. But the problem from just a price-adjusted standpoint is they rotate in Stephon Johnson and Dalton Carnes. So none of them have this elite route share. And the player with the best route share is honestly Samuel Brown. I prefer him straight up over Matthew Golden. It's not really even that close. Matthew Golden only has 398 receiving yards. That's behind Manjack and well behind Samuel Brown. I think Samuel Brown is very clearly the best price-adjusted play among these receivers, and he'd still just be a tournament option, someone you could look to if you're stacking Donovan Smith. Kansas State quarterback, I don't know what they're going to do. I think Avery Johnson's going to start. I think there's an outside chance he plays every snap. Their coach has been a little vocal about wanting to reduce the rotation. They've both been good. So, I mean, you can't really go wrong between Howard and Avery Johnson from a real-life football standpoint. For DFS, man, if Avery Johnson ever gets a full workload, he's just going to nuke a slate. 7,700. The guy has 16 designed attempts in back-to-back games. That's playing half the game. Like, this guy is electric. And we know Kansas State likes their mobile signal callers going back. Adrian Martinez, we can go back beyond that. Skylar Thompson. Man, I don't want to wish injury on anybody, Will Howard especially. He's been a wagon for us in the past. But, man, Avery Johnson, those of you playing tournaments, if he gets like 75% of the snaps, he could blow up a slate. Watch pregame, see what Kansas beat's saying. They haven't had a lot of good news on this. Coaching staff's trying to keep it under wraps. I don't know. Deep tournaments, maybe throw a flyer. The backfield, it's ebbed and flowed a lot this year. Kind of the hot hand. Ward has had it lately. We just saw him out carry DJ Giddens 15-9. Pretty nice to have the luxury of both these backs. It probably ends up being like a 50-50 split at the end of the year. I'd rather play Ward at the price right now. But honestly, Avery Johnson siphoning off so many carries has not helped Ward or Giddens. So I personally think it's tough to get to them. Their prices are fair, in my opinion. The receiving game is really injured. So Keegan Johnson, it looks like he's not going to play. He's doubtful. RJ Garcia, he's been playing a limited role recently. And they've actually found something pretty nice in their freshman in J.C. Brown. He just might take over. And there's also a chance like they move to a 5-man rotation because Brown's been so good. But anyway, to rank these players, Phillip Brooks is clearly one. 7.3 targets per game, just over 50 yards. Ben Sinnott, I think, is 2. He barely played in the last game with injury. He's probably here, so he should come back just fine. Price adjusted, I'd rather play Sinnott. I know I say his name different every single week. Someone in the comments actually corrected me. I just can't remember how to say it, and it is what it is. You watch 133 teams a week. You won't know how to pronounce everyone. So my apologies to those of you who are members of the pronunciation police. Anyway, wide receiver 3 here should probably be Jaden Jackson with RJ Garcia and Keegan Johnson. Injured, banged up. But then J.C. Brown, his playing time, I think, largely depends on Garcia and Keegan Johnson. So he's a little harder to play. Tournament option at $3,900, I think. None of the Kansas guys are really expensive. I think you can mix and match them. West Virginia, UCF, another pretty good game. There aren't really that many duds on the slate game-wise. 7-point spread in favor of UCF, 58 total. West Virginia's slow and run-heavy, 37% pass, 118th in pace. Garrett Green, when coaxed into shootouts, has been really good, and he's had a couple 300-yard games. Only averages 197 on the year through the air. That's on 23 attempts, but they're projected to trail in this game. And Green has really good rushing equity. 11 carries last game, 9 the game before, 349 cumulative yards. He left one game really early and missed another. So this is on, a season where he missed 2 games already. We're only in week 9. Donaldson has been inefficient, and he's now seeing his work cut. Justin Johnson outcarried him. Donaldson still handled most of the pass game work, but he's just been bad, man. There's no other way to put this. He's averaging 17.7 touches per game, just 64 rushing yards. Last week, Justin Johnson ran laps around him. I think CJ Donaldson's at risk of losing some work. You can play Justin Johnson as a change of pace. He outplayed Donaldson last week. So, no, they probably won't have the same game script, but this team runs so much anyway that I don't really think it matters. The receiving game, the big news is Hudson Clement is doubtful. That means we likely see Devin Carter as the 1. I think some combination of Preston Fox and Traylon Ray round out the 3 main receivers, with Cole Taylor operating as tight end. Rodney Gallagher and E.J. Horton have just been part-time players, even with the injury to Hudson Clement. So I would rank them 1 Carter, 2 Fox, 3 Traylon Ray. Traylon Ray is usable as a punt option at $3,400. UCF finally got the John Rice Plumlee game we've been waiting for. Happened against Oklahoma, so not too many people played him. I think you can go back to him in this spot. West Virginia has a horrific secondary. They're outside the top 100. They're allowing 4.9 yards per carry. Rice Plumlee's an electric rusher. He's averaging 214 through the air on just 23.5 attempts, so efficiency is there. He's completely fine at 7,200. He's right in the conversation for cash. RJ Harvey, it's about a 75-25 split between him and Johnny Richardson. He's coming off a 23 carry game, and he's now eclipsed 20 carries in 2 of the last 3 games. He did have a 16-touch game mixed in there, but he's still playing on pass downs. RJ Harvey is playing like a true feature back. Favored in the spot, 6,200. Great price-adjusted play. And then in the receiving game, Javon Baker, Kobe Hudson, these are your top 2. I'm still not willing to put Townsend over Hudson. the routes just favor Hudson so much. I mean, we have a long sample of this guy being awesome, had a good year last year. He played with Auburn, where he was a really good receiver there before transferring and following Malzahn. I'll still buy low on Hudson, but he's really close in price to Baker. Those of you just playing one lineup or something that are playing UCF guys, Baker is the better price adjusted play. Townsend would be third for me. And then they rotate tight ends. I know Randy Pittman's been pretty good. They're freshmen, but Holler still plays. It's tough to get to anyone beyond that. Georgia, Florida. The big question, what does Georgia do without Bowers? This game environment's not great. 47 total, 14.5 point spread. Georgia implied just shy of 31 points, so there's tons of good teams implied ahead of them. Should be a slow game. Georgia's 106th in pace. Florida's 101. Pass rate for both teams is pretty good. Georgia, 52%. Florida, 54%. Beck is averaging 308 yards per game quietly. He doesn't run, but he's live for a 300-yard bonus on any occasion. Still a tournament-only option because of price. Like, I'd rather play Plumlee straight up. Dewan Edwards, his workload has been excellent. He's averaging 17.8 touches per game. But Kendall Milton's been hurt. Roderick Robinson's been hurt. Both of them project to play here. I think a lot of this is just lack of alternatives. We have a huge sample of Milton and Edwards working together in almost a 50-50 timeshare. So I think the bottom could fall out on this. It largely depends on Milton's health, which, I mean, that's really hard to figure out right now. The Georgia Beats don't seem to have a good handle on this. Tournament-only option, 7,300 is a lot. Like, I'd straight up rather play Harvey. The receiving room, Bowers vacates just a monster opportunity share. You'd have to think Delp is the primary beneficiary. They play the same position. He's 3,400. His route rate immediately soared following the Bowers injury. To be specific, last week, Delp came in with a 75% route share. That was with Bowers participating in 32% before the injury. He's really cheap. I mean, he should be one of the preferred value plays on the slate. And then you probably see a much larger target share go Dominic Lovett and Ladd McConkey's way, assuming health for McConkey. He still hasn't played more than 50% of the routes, but they're coming off the bye. He should be healthier. Lovett was at 73% of the routes. He's the premier Missouri transfer. I think these guys see an uptick in targets. Lovett was at 8 targets last game when Bowers went down. Ra Thomas is your third option, 68% of the routes. I think he's viable as well. I'd rather play him over guys like Marcus Rosemy-Jack Saint, if that makes sense. Just price adjusted. I think you find your way up. Marcus Rosemy-Jack Saint about a 50% route share, but he's not cheap. Find the 200 for Ra, in my opinion. Delp, by far the best price adjusted play. Florida, not even implied for 17 points. Mertz is extremely hard to play because he takes so many sacks. 271 yards per game on 32 attempts. Should throw a lot. Don't anticipate any sort of efficiency from Mertz. I think there's other weeks we can get to him. This is just a tough matchup. 50-50 timeshare between Johnson and Etienne. Etienne's a better price adjusted play, but it's not wise to play either against Georgia. Ricky Pearsall still really expensive. He's priced like Marvin Harrison. Tough matchup. I'll pass. Only things to really mention with the Florida pass catchers, they've gotten healthier. So I'm not going to play them, but just for those of you that get crazy, Eugene Wilson, 78% of routes. Khalil Jackson, 63%. Arliss Boardingham, their tight end, 61%. Those are the main options. The only thing that might throw wrenches in this is their 4-star freshman, Andy Jean, missed their last game. He's projected back. His route share has ebbed and flowed kind of between 20 and 50%. I think that would mainly affect Khalil Jackson. But yeah, Florida's not a wise target to begin with. BYU, Texas. The spread in this game is 18.5. The total's 50. BYU, same situation here with Keaton Slovis. Parallels Graham Mertz well. Takes too many sacks to target, and Keaton Slovis has been terrible. So X out Keaton Slovis, pretty easy. Aiden Robbins returned to the backfield and immediately outcarried LJ Martin, 16-10. Pass game work was identical in routes. Aiden Robbins is 4K. I mean, Texas might slaughter BYU, but at the end of the day, you just don't see guys that project for around 15 touches at 4K often. So he's a value option. There's a lot of value on this slate if you guys haven't gathered. The receiving game, Keanu Hill's questionable. I think they might sit him. Darius Lassiter has been their wide receiver 1 in routes. Targets haven't exactly been there, but he had a crazy circus catch last week. And then Cody Epps is back. He immediately came back and had a really good route share. So I think I'm just trying to get to either Lassiter or Epps. Epps at 75% of the routes. quietly. That only trailed Isaac Rex, their tight end, and Lassiter himself. So Epps, man, pretty good play, 4K flat. I'm interested. A couple value options for BYU. Texas. Quinn Ewers is out. Malik Murphy is in. Malik Murphy allegedly has electric dual threat ability. We have not seen him at all, so I don't know. I think he's worth playing at 7K. All I can really say is he's operating the Texas offense when he throws. Having Worthy, Mitchell, Whittington, and Sanders is pretty good. Awesome run game to fall back on. I don't think we're running into like a Mississippi State situation from last week or a Chiron Drones where you're inept throwing. This guy's a 4-star. Texas kept him for a reason. They're starting him over Arch Manning. I don't know. The pedigree's good. The mobility's good. BYU stinks. I think you can use Murphy. I would hesitate in cash. There's other players I'd get to. He's close to like Plumlee and stuff, so I don't know. He's a good play, though. Jonathan Brooks might be even a better play now. 21.3 touches per game. He's averaging 117 rushing yards, 24.6 receiving yards. This is on a 47.5% pass rate. With Malik Murphy under center, they might just go full run. Jonathan Brooks, another game, another excellent play. Worthy, Mitchell, Whittington, Sanders, they kind of ride with Murphy and what you think this pass rate looks like under Texas. I have them slightly run heavier in the projections, but these are elite options receiving. Sanders, 4,800, always too cheap. His route rate jumped back up to 70% after the injury. The worst one's Whittington. He's at about 50% of the routes. 80, Mitchell, Worthy, they ebb and flow a little bit with Worthy clearly ahead. They would be just tournament options, and it's more a price thing than anything. I think you could play Murphy naked if you want, but Brooks would be the best price-adjusted play here. Next game, Oregon, Utah, 48 total, 6.5-point spread. I am no fan of this Utah defense, and I think Oregon might drop a 40 bomb on them. Their implied team total is only 27, so I don't think these guys are going to pop in projections as much as they normally do, but still an excellent team for tournaments. Utah, I think, is a severe sell high. Bo Nix, he's not running like last year, probably in efforts to keep him healthy, but he hasn't had more than 4 designed attempts in any of the last 4 games. That's a problem. He's averaging 291 yards through the air. His ceiling's just not as high as last year. He should be an 8,900 quarterback, not 98. Tournaments, he's fine, but I'd rather play Dylan Gabriel straight up. Bucky Irving coming off the injury scare. He needs teams to push him in order to reach that touch ceiling. So efficient, though, man. Like Bucky Irving, 95 rushing yards per game, 29 receiving yards per game on 16.6 touches. There is upside for 20 if they're pushed. The spread 6.5, so indicates they probably will be. I do not like Utah. I think this could get out of hand. If it does, Jordan James, pretty good play, averaging 9.6 touches per game. He's been above 11 in the last 2. He's now 5,100, though, so you're playing, like he's close to RJ Harvey. He's 100 less than Le'Veon Moss. You got to make hard decisions with Jordan James. Receiving core, Troy Franklin, very clearly their one, averaging 110 yards per game on 8.7 targets. The dude's a monster. Tez Johnson is their 2. They ebb and flow a little bit beyond this, but Tez Johnson has 15 targets over the last 2 games. I don't clearly know who the 3 and 4 are. Gary Bryant had 2 games without a target in a row, but last week his route rate was back up to around 50%. That came at the expense of Trayshawn Holden. These 2 guys are probably just darts. And Terrence Ferguson, man, only 3 targets last game, but the routes continue to rise. He's getting close to 70%. Not going to be a preferred punt option because we have so many, like he's 100 less than Cody Epps, but yeah, you could play him. He's in play. Bryson Barnes, just kind of, I don't know. He's like Derek Carr, man. I mean, 7,600 for this guy, like he should be like 56. You can't play him in this matchup, I don't think. Team total's low. Oregon's defense is good. He stinks. Run rate is really high, 37%. I'm out on Barnes. They're slamming Jaquindon Jackson into the back of the offensive line a ton. He's by far the best play on this slate. And for those of you that have seen like the Sion Vaki highlights, the safety converted to running back, he only has 20% of the routes. Jackson was at 60%, so he's not like the clear pass game back. I know like he dusted a guy on that wheel, but he's not playing a ton in the pass game. He's just gotten there on a couple really big plays. But if you want to just bet on volume, Jaquindon Jackson's a much better play here, 5,700. He's one of the best price-adjusted running backs on the slate, even in a bad matchup. If you're getting someone 26 carries, he's going to pay off. The receiving game, Thomas Yasmin went down. That has paved the way for Landon King at tight end. He's participating in a ton of routes. Sadly, Bryson Barnes has no eyes for Landon King. He only has 4 targets this year. Mikey Matthews, he leads the team in targets. His route rate's still at 50%. Just play your stud freshman. He's your best player. I don't know what Whittingham's doing. Devon Vele's out there running wind sprints alongside Money Parks. Offense is a mess. Play Jaquindon Jackson and move on. Speaking of offensive messes, we now move to Pitt Notre Dame. The spread in this game is 20.5, 44.5 total. Yep, Pitt has an upset victory, but this team stinks, and Christian Velo is just as bad as Jerkovic, and he runs less. Don't play a Pitt signal caller. Maybe you could play Sibo Flemister, 4,400. The guy had 23 carries last game. No targets, but he did play a lot on pass downs. So another value play you could maybe get to. The matchup is egregiously hard, but they benched Rodney Hammond. They benched Daniel Carter a long time ago. Maybe this goes back to the 50-50 committee it was 2 weeks ago, but I don't know. It's Flemister or pass. I'm not playing a guy in the pass game. For what it's worth, Bub Means did have 16 targets last game. I mean, 4,800, you could definitely do worse. I'd rather play Bub than Kanata Mumfield, but it's close, and I don't think either are good plays. Tight ends, Kenny Johnson and Gavin Bartholomew used a lot. As you can see, Pitt ran 1 million plays last week, so don't think they're going to see 16 targets again. Bub Means, that is. Notre Dame plays really slow, limits play volume from their opponents. I think it's much more likely that Bub Means is in the 6 to 10 range. Notre Dame, Sam Hartman, he's just playing in an inept offense, doesn't run anymore, only 26 attempts per game. He's way too expensive for this game environment. You could always get like a rogue 300 performance through efficiency, but quite unlikely. Estime, when games are close, he plays a lot more, as we could see by the 22 carry game. They will rotate in 5 backs when it's not competitive. That's probably the case here. He's a bit expensive. I'd rather pay down at running back this week, but there's always a chance for a bonus in multiple scores against Pitt. This defense stinks. Receivers, a revolving door for Notre Dame. All we can really bet on is Mitchell Evans being the top pass catcher, their tight end. Chris Tyree earned more snaps. He's 1 yard behind Mitch Evans on the year, but still, I mean, we're looking at like 65% as the ceiling for any of these receivers. They finally listed Rico Flores as a starter, one of their freshmen. They benched Jaden Thomas. He played like 1 snap last week. They benched Tobias Merriweather. I think their 3 wide receiver set is going to be Flores, Greathouse, and Tyree. But they run a ton of 2 tight ends. Holden Stotts plays a lot in addition to Evans. It's not like Tobias and Jaden Thomas are going away. Jordan Faison, their walk-on lacrosse players, playing a decent amount. Just a disaster. Play Estime or do not play anyone in this game. Duke Louisville, probably the biggest injury news on the slate is in this game. It's not just Riley Leonard. Jawar Jordan's questionable with a hamstring. So tons of late news. 4-point spread in favor of Louisville, 46 total. Honestly, you know, the total's so low, maybe the late news doesn't matter that much. I don't know how much of this game you want to play anyway. Leonard's huge to the spread. Henry Bellon's been bad. He can't run or throw. So if he's out, I would probably look to Louisville against the spread and vice versa if Leonard plays. Committee was extended a little bit between Waters and Moore. We saw Coleman finally get some carries. He was in a 3-way committee with these 2 last year, but he's been injured. Receiving core, it's Jordan Moore, Jalen Calhoun, and Samir Higgins every single play. They've actually gotten good efficiency, but I think that stems from Leonard. When Bellon's under center, I have no interest. Mickey Dalmalin's missed the last 2 games, and Duke's beat reporters at the concession stand right now, all the way through kickoff, so don't expect to know whether he plays. The guy who benefits is Jeremiah Hasley, but you won't get that information more than likely, so probably just a stay away. Louisville, Jack Plummer, 23 rushing yards, not great. 271 as a passer. Just lost last week or 2 weeks ago. They had a bye, I believe. Anyway, coming off an L, 7,500 for Plummer is quite a bit, only 30 attempts per game. He's priced up after the efficiency we saw in non-con. They're now facing tougher teams. Don't like Plummer. Jawar Jordan, if he plays, this guy was a bell cow before he went down. And then without him, they just went full 50-50 committee. I think the best approach is probably just avoid. Duke has a good defense. could see inefficient play regardless. And it's not like Jawar Jordan's cheap. The risk of him even being limited just makes him a stay away, in my opinion. Jamari Thrash is really the only guy I think we can play. 20 targets last game. This is like Marvin Harrison for Ohio State. When the going gets tough for Louisville, they're leaning on their alpha Thrash. He's playable, but I do not like anyone else. Kevin Coleman, Jimmy Callaway, Amari Huggins, Bruce, Chris Bell. They take the last two positions and rotate them pretty evenly. So you got like 40 to 60% of the routes for all these cheap Louisville pieces outside of Thrash. They also rotate tight end. It's a mess. Last game on the DraftKings main slate, then we will rank players, then we'll go to FanDuel. We got a lot of requests for both of those. But USC Cal, 67 point spread, 67 point total, 11-point spread. Awesome game. Really happy they included it, honestly. Two electric offenses should be fast. USC's 57th in pace, Cal's 11th. Both teams pass a decent amount. Caleb Williams. I see now that he has the wrong tag. I'm going to try to adjust this on the fly, but this is honestly pretty decent spot for Caleb Williams. I hate when this happens. There's a guy on Pitt with the Caleb Williams name too. I mean, like, can you name your kid something more creative? Anyway, sorry to any of those of you out there with Caleb Williams names, but this has to be fixed, so I'm doing it right now. There we go. All right. Accurate pricing for Caleb Williams. He's expensive, especially on FanDuel. I think he's out of play there. But on DraftKings, maybe you could get to him. There's a lot of value, but it's all the quarterbacks are expensive. So I still don't think you could play like two studs. If you play Caleb Williams, you're still probably looking at like Max Johnson or something. Anyway, he's averaging 286 yards per game. He has 149 rush yards. He's coming off back-to-back bad games. So I don't know, maybe players don't look at him in DFS anymore. He still projects decently. So you could play him in tournaments. The backfield is devolving into a 50-50 timeshare between Lloyd and Jones. No, thank you. And then in the receiving game, very interesting usage. Brandon Rice and Taj Washington have been dominating routes as much as a USC receiver can. They bench Mario Williams. The last two games, he hasn't even hit 20% of the routes. I mean, RIP Mario Williams, head back to Oklahoma, buddy. It's not looking good for you in USC. Brendan Rice and Taj, 67% of the routes. Last game, Mario Williams, 19. Yikes. Maybe he's injured. I don't know. Dorian Singer, 56%. One of the biggest disappointments this year is his just complete plummet from being the second leading receiver in the Pac-12. Zachariah Branch needs to play 100% of the snaps. He's by far the best player on this offense, not named Caleb Williams. Unfortunately, Lincoln Riley gave him 33% of the routes. They're playing Michael Jackson, Kyron Hudson, Deuce Robinson, who I think is promising probably later in his career, but he's young. I mean, like Michael Jackson and Kyron Hudson should not even be filling water for this team, let alone playing snaps. I mean, I just don't know what they're doing. Hard to play anyone on USC right now, largely because of price, but also rotational stuff. Cal, interesting. 58th or 5,800 is the price of Fernando Mendoza, their freshman quarterback. He's gotten injured a couple times this year, so there's probably some meat left on the bone here. We've seen every single team that plays USC put up points, so I don't hate a contrarian Fernando Mendoza. He looks like he's somewhat mobile, 50 rushing yards. His passing efficiency's been good. It's just he keeps getting hurt. So I'll play some of him contrarian-wise. The matchup's just way too good. Jaden Ott is in a committee now. Isaiah Ifans, it's like 60-40 split. I mean, you can't play Ott at this price. I don't think, at least. They're 11-point dogs still. In the receiving game, I do think Fernando Mendoza is good for the pass game. Before, when we saw Sam Jackson, the guy can't throw. Ben Finley is not a NCAA quarterback. Fernando Mendoza is a 4-star. I mean, like, Jeremiah Hunter and Taj Davis, these guys are interesting now that we have somebody competent throwing the ball. I think you can play them in tournaments. Tron Grizel, he's a rotational player. Just pretty nasty beyond that. So we will look elsewhere. All right, I believe that does it for the main slate. Yep. Next up is FanDuel and Knight. So before we go on, I'm going to rank the players for the DraftKings main slate per request. We'll do top 5 per position, and then we'll discuss the additional games on FanDuel. So for quarterback, price adjusted, we'll start. This is risky. Okay, so the top value, this is no surprise to me. John Rice Plumlee comes out number 1, favorite over West Virginia, elite dual threat ability. If you can stomach the potential aggravation for injury, he's an excellent play. Malik Murphy actually comes out 2 for us, which I am a bit surprised. But again, I'll reiterate, there's some guessing in his projection because we haven't seen him. I basically have him as like an average dual threat quarterback with average passing efficiency. And then the spread gets you the rest of the way there with him. So he's a good play, just risky. Fernando Mendoza actually pops here too. Once you give him full allotment of snaps, that's how bad USC's defense is. It makes freshman signal caller, who's played about a game combined, Fernando Mendoza, look good. And then the last 2, no surprise, Dylan Gabriel, Max Johnson. We talked about them a lot. Good value plays. I think they're safer than the Mendoza stuff and the Malik Murphy stuff. Running back, dominated by the mid-price guys. Le'Veon Moss tops the list, price adjusted. Texas A&M back, just favored in this game. He hasn't seen fewer than 17 touches in the last 3 games. Jonathan Brooks projects extremely well. Part of this due to the slight bump I gave the run game, switching from Ewers down to Malik Murphy, increased the run rate. RJ Harvey's 3, 6,200 for him, favored by a score over West Virginia. Guy dominating opportunities. Then we get Jaquindon Jackson for Utah, just huge opportunity for him. And interestingly, last one is Mario Anderson. I personally don't love this. Could get absolutely slaughtered by A&M. But I do like the top 4. Receiver, we move down the list. A lot of good value plays. Okay. Oscar Delp projects as the top value, price adjusted. And I think that's no surprise. You should play every snap. Then we've got Evan Stewart. Again, just this should be an absolute rout of the game. South Carolina's defense is awful. We've got Nick Anderson for Oklahoma, jumping into a new role and flat out might just be their wide receiver 1. Javon Baker. And then we round things out with Evan Stewart. Ainias Smith is right behind him, just for reference. So that's the top 5 per position right now. This will change with spreads, but feel pretty good about the quarterbacks and running backs, receiver, mixing and matching that position more often anyway. But let's go to FanDuel and talk about the remaining games. We'll siphon through them. Washington, Stanford's a DraftKings night game. Same thing with Air Force, Colorado State. All right, here's one. Tennessee, Kentucky's on the FanDuel slate. 3.5 point spread, 51.5 total. Joe Milton, he's been awful, averaging somewhere in the 6s yards per attempt wise. He does have 232 rushing yards. He's coming off a game with 10 designed attempts. I mean, he's fairly cheap on FanDuel. I still don't think he's cheap enough. Kentucky slows you down. They're 115th in pace. That clashes drastically with Tennessee's 6th overall pace ranking. So I don't love Milton. The running backs, 3-way timeshare between Wright, Jabari Small-Sampson. They're all really cheap on FanDuel, but there's opportunity cost. We got a ton of good backs. They use 2 wide receivers, and that's it. It's Squirrel White and Ramel Keaton. Neither of them are expensive, so I think you could play these 2. But this has kind of been a team that's been my kryptonite, trying to guess the wide receiver 3. 2 weeks ago, I thought it was Thornton. He's just a scrub. Last week, I thought it was Chaz Nimrod. He played 80% of the routes 2 weeks ago. Last week, just straight up 50-50 between him and Webb. I don't think you could play either. So I'll focus on Keaton and White. White, I think, is a much better price-adjusted play on FanDuel. Devin Leary, 7,500. It makes me blink. Like, do I play Devin Leary as the value? But ultimately, the ceiling's really low. He's averaging 200 yards per game. Not even. 197. Negative 45 rush yards. Leary has been awful. Tennessee's defense is good. So that's tough for me. Ray Davis is 10K on FanDuel. There's just better price-adjusted plays. As much as I love Ray Davis, 111 yards per game. You can get similar opportunity. He's averaging 18.4 touches per game. Like, you can find that in other games. So I would still pass. The receivers are cheap. So if you're looking for a one-off or a skinny stack of this game, Barian Brown, Dane Key, Tavian Robinson, not much separating them. I would rank them 1 Brown, 2 Key, 3 Tavian. Ohio State, Wisconsin. This is on the FanDuel slate as well. 14.5 point spread, 44.5 total. Yikes. Kyle McCord takes sacks. He's not expensive on FanDuel, but man, like, what do we gain by playing Kyle McCord that we don't already gain just by playing a one-off Marvin Harrison? Like, that's the only guy he throws to. Just play Marvin Harrison straight up. Like, Ibuka doesn't even have a good target share when he's active. Marvin Harrison is averaging 12.3 targets per game over the last 4. I think if you're playing Ohio State, you can flat out just play Harrison. That's all you need to do. Trevion Henderson allegedly is going to return here. I'll believe it when I see it, but this has been running back roulette. Mine Williams, 24 carries last week. Terrible efficiency. I don't know. Maybe it can train Henderson, but this could be a 3-way committee. For whatever reason, this team hates Dallin Hayden. I don't know why. Wisconsin, Braden Locke stinks. You'd have to get money salary-wise to play him. Braylon Allen carried 29 times last game. I mean, he's college's A.J. Dillon. I don't know how you average 100 yards per game on 21 touches, but he's doing it. Now he's facing a much more difficult matchup. If this guy is grinding his way to 100 yards against Illinois on 3 yards a carry, what do we think Ohio State's going to do? He's 8,500, so again, I'm like blinking here. Do I have to play Braylon Allen at this cheap price tag on FanDuel? But man, this guy stinks. Not playing a Wisconsin receiver attached to Braden Locke against an elite Ohio State defense. That is just the way it is. Next game up, Vandy. Just kidding. This is a DraftKings game. Another FanDuel game, Colorado, UCLA, 17.5-point spread in favor of the Bruins, 62.5 total. Really fast game. Colorado 4th in pace, UCLA 12th. Colorado has a 60% pass rate, UCLA at 47%. Shedeur Sanders is exceedingly expensive on FanDuel, even though he's averaging 345 yards. But arguably the best defense he's faced all year is UCLA. Awesome pass rush, which is going to get to him. Teams allowing 5 sacks per game. A lot of that Sanders' fault for holding the ball so long. But they're also running a lot of downfield concepts, which doesn't help Sanders. I'd rather just play a receiver. It was right back to what we saw the first time we had Travis Hunter in the lineup. It's Weaver, it's Horn, it's Hunter. And Hunter's coming off a 19-target game. This guy was over 80% of the routes. I mean, the second he's healthy, just hold nothing back, Dion. Just throw Hunter out there. I love it. He's also 7,700. So, I mean, you could play him for sure. Weaver is in play. I think Horn is a buy low. Play any of the receivers. The running backs, straight up three-way committee, Hankerson, Edwards, Alton, McCaskill, not playable. The quarterback situation for UCLA is murky. Dante Moore hit the bench. Probably wise. Guy just needs to develop. I think he'll be a really good player at some point down the road. Ethan Garber's handled most of the snaps. He's just a game manager. Colorado's defense stinks, so this is worth noting. But they're also getting back Colin Schlee, who handles all of the designed rushing. So pretty tough to play a UCLA signal caller. Carson Steele could just absolutely feast on this defense. 8,800 is too cheap for him. Coming off 3 straight games of at least 20 carries. Carson Steele is a good play on FanDuel. The receiving game, depending on how much we think Garbers plays over Schlee, Sturdivant, Loya, those are the 2 main guys I'd look to. Cam Brown and Kyle Ford split the wide receiver 3 job. Just tournament mix and match options. UNC, Georgia Tech, 11.5-point spread, 64 total. Another awesome game on FanDuel. Props to FanDuel for putting out an amazing slate. Drake May, I think among the expensive quarterbacks on this slate, he's probably my favorite. This game can definitely get up and down. North Carolina, 14th in pace. Georgia Tech, 43rd. Both teams over 50% pass rate. Drake May has Tez Walker back. Drake May has 200 yards rushing. He's averaging 321 through the air. Georgia Tech's defense is pathetic. 8.2 yards per pass attempt allowed. 5.4 yards per carry allowed. Drake May's a stud. They narrowed their receiver rotation. It's Nate McCollum, J.J. Jones, and Tez Walker. Tez Walker played 100% of the routes last game, 15 targets. He's 10K, but I mean, you can make him work. And if you don't want to play Tez, for whatever reason, the other full-time receivers, Nate McCollum and J.J. Jones, are really cheap. McCollum is 5,700 on FanDuel. What are we doing? Omarion Hampton's also cheap. I mean, this guy's locked in as the bell cow at this point. He hasn't seen fewer than 18 touches in 4 straight games, been above 20 in 3 of the 4. I mean, he's another great play. I'm playing North Carolina a lot on FanDuel. Georgia Tech also, as a run back, looking pretty good. 50% pass rate, 43rd. Pace, Haynes King, way too expensive on FanDuel, but he's been shockingly good. The guy's averaging like 6.2 yards per carry. Wasn't expecting that, but go Haynes King. I honestly would rather play him on the DraftKings night slate, but I mean, he should not be less than 1,000 below Drake May in price. Backfield's a committee. Jamal Haynes and Trey Cooley lead it, but Dante Smith also plays a little bit. Receiving game did not have Singleton last week. What that did was basically put Christian Leary into a full-time role. So Rutherford's the 1. Blaylock is the 2. I think some combination of Singleton and Leary is going to round out this rotation. If Singleton's out, Leary's a really good play at 5,300. He's probably even better on DraftKings. There's other values you can get to. Rutherford's extremely cheap on this slate too. He's a nice run back as well. All right, this is the late night slate now. So the last one is a FanDuel only game, I believe. If I missed a game, just leave a comment. I might have. Excuse me if I did. But Cincinnati, Oklahoma State's not on any DraftKings slate. It's on the FanDuel slate only. 7.5-point spread in favor of OK State, 53 total. I like the over in this game. Emory Jones, dual threat extraordinaire. Oklahoma State's defense does not scare you. They have a good pass rush, and that's it. 8.2 yards per attempt allowed, 4.3 yards per carry. Jones has good volume, just not good efficiency. 9,900 is a bit too expensive for my liking, but the offense should move the ball here. Ryan Montgomery projects to return, so now the backfield likely devolves into a three-way committee between Miles Montgomery, Ryan Montgomery, and Corey Kiner at the helm. Receivers interesting for one-offs. Xavier Henderson, 8.3 targets per game. Braden Smith, 6.3. D. Wiggins, 4.5 over the last 3 games. I'd rather play like a UNC cheap guy or something. And then on the Oklahoma State side, it's kind of just, do we play Ollie Gordon or do we go somewhere else? I think you should play Ollie Gordon, or at least consider it. The guy has 36 touches and 30 touches in back-to-back games and monster efficiency. Ollie Gordon is a pure wagon. And then for cheapies, Brennan Presley, Jaden Bray, and Rashad Owen should be considered as well. This team still throws the ball a ton, 55%. That's the main slate. Thank you guys for watching. Just under an hour. If you have a question, leave a comment or reach out to me on Twitter. That's a little easier to find me. I'm at Matt_Gajewski over there. Otherwise, thank you for watching. We'll be back again next week for another main slate. Until then, good luck. We'll see you next time.